What kind of Congress would we be if we did not respond to all of these voter suppression bills that are mushrooming all over the country? A violent insurrection on this very Capitol driven by the big lie, metastasized into a kind of voter suppression cancer all across the body politic. I want to remind all of us that the only reason we're here in this chamber at all is because somebody voted for us. Voting rights is not just some other issue alongside other issues. It gets to the heart of who we are in the first place, a democracy. The most powerful words ever uttered in a democracy are "the people have spoken." And shame on us if we allow the people's voices to be silenced in this chamber.
Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in New York. The time has come, and it's all on the Democrats, unfortunately. They're all we have left. They have to make the ultimate choice, democracy or the filibuster. That's it. Nothing else on the menu. Majority Leader Chuck Schumer moving today to set up a vote in the Senate on the Freedom to Vote Act, likely to take place Wednesday. Schumer has made clear the legislation has the full support of all 50 Democrats, puts it in a better position than the previous voting rights bill, the For the People Act, but it still falls well short of the 60 votes it needs to pass with the filibuster in place. Sets up this week's possible last dance for voting rights legislation, as our colleague, NBC's Sahil Kapoor puts it. Senate Democrats will have to go on the record with how much they're committed to preserving and protecting the integrity of our democracy, the right to vote, or whether they think it's more important to leave a Senate procedural thing in place, the filibuster. As of right now, 2 Democratic senators, Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, do not support eliminating the filibuster in any circumstance, which, as we just said, is the Freedom to Vote Act's only path for survival. Voting rights advocates stress that President Biden's engagement and messaging is key to getting the bill passed. So far, they're not impressed. Washington Post reports this, quote, voting rights advocates meet once every week or two with White House officials via video conference. In almost every session, an advocate speaks up to say that President Biden must do more, that American democracy is under threat, and the president is not meeting the challenge. At one such meeting earlier this year, a Biden aide responded that Democrats would simply have to, quote, out-organize the other side. It's according to multiple advocates familiar with the exchange who spoke anonymously. The comment infuriated advocates who believe they're watching former President Trump actively and perhaps permanently undermine faith in U.S. elections. That is exactly what is happening. The ex-president is doing it out loud. He has said so. He's made abundantly clear that the only litmus test for being a Republican now is to embrace the big lie about fraud. Former presidents are already laying the groundwork, laying the foundation for the next election fight, guaranteeing that if he runs again and contests the election results again, he's going to be in a great position, a far more advantageous spot than he was in 2020. NBC News reports this, quote, in next year's races for governor and secretary of state, for Congress, and all the way down to state legislative seats, Republicans eager for Trump's support have embraced these baseless claims about a stolen election. The issue is particularly animating campaigns for Secretary of State, the office that in many states oversees elections, in electoral battlegrounds that narrowly backed Biden over Trump in 2020 and will be hotly contested again in the 2024 presidential election. Democrats' moment of truth when it comes to saving our democracy from Trump Republicans is where we start this hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Jake Sherman is here, founder of Punchbowl News and an MSNBC contributor. Also with us, Jason Johnson, journalism and politics professor at Morgan State University, MSNBC and the Griot contributor, and Congressman Joe Neguse is here of Colorado. He's a member of the House Judiciary Committee, as well as a House impeachment manager during Trump's second impeachment trial. Congressman, I'm not an expert on very many things anymore in American politics, but I promise you this. Donald Trump can lose again, but you have no guarantee that the winner will become the next president if nothing happens at the federal level. Do people understand that?
Certainly the House Democratic Caucus understands it, Nicole, and it's good to be with you. I think you articulated it well. Really, the question facing the Senate is a binary question, whether they will save democracy or not. I am hopeful that after tomorrow, or I suppose Wednesday's vote, cloture vote on the compromise measure, that you described and that Senator Manchin has put forward, that perhaps those two Democratic senators that you referenced will have the clarity that they have apparently or ostensibly been looking for, and that we can finally get to the business of doing what has to be done, which is ultimately performing a constitutional carve-out of the filibuster, as Whip Clyburn has recommended, so that we can protect voting rights, which are, as Senator Warnock so eloquently put it on the Senate floor, sacrosanct. You know, the most fundamental right under our Constitution, the right from which all other rights flow.
Has Joe Biden done enough?
Look, I think that President Biden has, my sense, has tried to give the senators who have been negotiating this compromise measure for the better part of the last several months the sufficient time and space to do that. I suspect that you will see the president perhaps engage in more robust outreach in the coming weeks following Wednesday's vote. I think that that is likely to be the case. He has been unabashed about his position on this particular issue. I think he has issued a clarion call to his colleagues in Congress to take this seriously. And so I expect that he will do even more than he has done already.
The president gave an extremely powerful speech in Philadelphia, well received, and has done nothing else publicly. Congressman, is there more happening that we don't see? Is his involvement greater than that?
Certainly, the White House has had a number of conversations with members. I won't get into those private conversations. Suffice to say, I think the president has made very clear his belief that Republicans in various state legislatures across the country are really crossing red lines in terms of implementing very subversive pieces of legislation that undermine the fundamental right to vote. And he has been very clear in his support for the legislative efforts that we have been pushing in the United States Congress to attempt to push back and roll back those state efforts. So I again suspect that you'll see more from the president in the coming days and weeks ahead after the vote on Wednesday.
Are you optimistic?
I'm certainly not optimistic about the vote on Wednesday. I think the cloture vote is likely to fail. I suppose we'll see what Jake has to say if he has any insights in terms of his conversations on Capitol Hill. But I don't think that there is any likelihood that the filibuster will be overcome with respect to the compromise measure. I am optimistic that at the end of the day, we will be able to reach an accommodation with respect to reform of the filibuster that enables us to get to the president's desk voting rights legislation. And that optimism is largely born from, I think, the reality that public opinion has changed so dramatically over the course of the last 9 months on this particular issue, largely because of the efforts that I described in states like Texas and Florida, Georgia, and Iowa, where I think it is becoming all too clear to the vast majority of Americans that you have many in the other political party who are working to try to undermine the right to vote of each and every American, regardless of one's political affiliation. And that's simply antithetical to what we believe fundamentally as Americans.
And Jake, look, how bad are the voter suppression laws? Well, they're so bad that Major League Baseball moved the All-Star game out of Georgia at the beginning of this conversation. In some ways, it's remarkable that Major League Baseball did more than just about anyone else to protest voter suppression laws, but that's where we were. Where are we now, Jake?
Well, let me just respond to a couple things that the congressman said. I have a lot of respect for him, but I just think that we get into this, we as a political people who follow politics and cover politics, we get into these discussions about Joe Manchin and hope that he, again, not me, but I think Democrats hope that he is somebody he is not. Joe Manchin is a supporter of the filibuster. He is for a 60-vote threshold for legislation. Joe Biden has not said one word about eliminating the filibuster, nor, and if he said something, Joe Manchin's not moving. Like, people look for this deeper meaning in what Joe Manchin, and we see this all the time in the mainstream media, I guess, of which I'm a part, but I'd like to think we're not guilty of this, but like, Joe Manchin is a supporter of the filibuster. He has said a million times he's not changing the filibuster, he's not changing the 60-vote threshold. This legislation is going nowhere. I don't know if there's a better way to understand this, but Joe Manchin is supporting the filibuster. And I just think that people you know, I understand the importance, or what Democrats consider the importance of this legislation. I get all of that. But Manchin just is not moved. And we see this, by the way, not only on this, Nicole, but on the reconciliation package. I know that's not the topic here, but just to like tie this together, this is an unfortunate habit that we've gotten into. Joe Manchin is for a $1.5 trillion bill, is not for clean energy provisions, and he's not changing. And people might not like it, or might decide to ignore it, or might hope that he becomes a different politician than he is. But Joe Manchin is much closer to Republicans on all of these issues, and he's not going to change, and we should take him at his word when he says what he's for and what he's against.
So, Jason, I appreciate the reality check from Jake Sherman, and I'm sure he's correct. He usually is. So let's take his reporting to the bank. There will be no federal legislation to protect the right to vote in America. Right now, I think there are 407 voter suppression, voter nullification laws racing through. 33 of them have become law. They're auditing the count in counties and states where Trump won. They're laying the groundwork to overturn not just the next presidential election where Trump's on the ballot, and it won't even matter if he wins or loses next time. Jason, the whole frame around which we cover politics will not matter. It will not matter if Joe Biden wins Georgia and Arizona again, because you could have insurrections popping up all over. Where are we heading?
So this is weird. I am not an optimist when it comes to any of this, but I have always believed, and I have said this for a long time about Joe Manchin, as much as I've disagreed with tons of his positions, is that he has always left himself wiggle room if he chooses for a big John McCain moment where he'll make sure he goes down in the history books. To say that you don't want to weaken the filibuster, to say that you don't want to destroy the filibuster, is not the same thing as saying that you wouldn't be willing to make a change. I think there is a possibility, I'm not saying likely, but there is a possibility that Joe Manchin could agree with President Biden and say, I don't want to destroy the filibuster, but I do think we have to go back to a filibuster where you had to stand there and actually argue your point instead of it just being a slip of paper. If he were to make that concession, it is possible to get this legislation passed. So that's the first thing I want to say. If that does not occur, if there is no change, if there is no federal voting legislation, then we're essentially a banana republic. I mean, it's all over after that. We don't even have to get to 2024. I've said all along, if Republicans take over the House and Senate in 2022, they'll find some excuse to impeach Joe Biden. And the only concern that I've had about this all along, whether it's Manchin or Sinema or President Biden or anything else like that, is I don't understand. This is a violation of all common sense political science. The number one job of a politician is to make sure you get reelected. And if Democrats don't do this, they're all going to lose their job. So I don't understand how they can have apprehension. We will be a one-party state if none of this gets done. But I hold out the possibility that Joe Manchin has left himself wiggle room so that he can look like the hero that saved democracy and still continue to be an obstructionist down the road.
Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, no, Manchin has said those things. He has said, I will not change the filibuster. Stop asking me about that. And he's not supported a carve-out for this. He's not supported that, and he said he has entertained conversations about the talking filibuster, but he has said in order to end the talking filibuster, you need 60 votes. So, yes, it would make it more difficult to filibuster. By the way, he's not said he's for this. He has said he is willing to consider it. Yeah. And just let me just add one more thing here. What Manchin has, what supporters of the filibuster have said is that there is no such thing as a carve-out, right? They find it very difficult within the Senate's rules and the Senate's strictures and traditions to carve out and say there's only one thing that you need 50 votes on. I was literally, Nicole, just having this conversation with some other reporters in the hallway by the Senate chamber. If there was ever an opportunity to blow up the filibuster, it would be like today if the debt ceiling wasn't lifted. I could see like a cataclysmic event like that for the economy. You could see something like that happening. But I think before that, Republicans would drop in and vote for it like Mitch McConnell did a couple weeks ago. So like Manchin has basically said all the things that we're saying here, which is I'm not for it. I'm not leaving I'm like, stop asking me about it. I'm done talking about it. That's what he said. I mean, there is very little wiggle room here and very little daylight that I see unless I'm missing something.
Jake, I guess the thing is Mitch McConnell did put the filibuster aside for judges. So I think maybe Jason holds out that the future and fate of our democracy, the ability not just to have the right to vote, but to have your vote not nullified by the Frankenstein post-Raffensperger Secretary of State that Trump backs in Georgia, for one example, there are dozens, might be as urgent as a judge. No?
Totally, Nicole. I see that. All I'm saying is that at this moment, we have no available evidence that that's the case. Like, maybe that does happen. Maybe they rewrite the rules of the Senate or they change the filibuster. I'm completely leaving open the fact that that could happen at some point in time. But right now, based on the information that we know and the reporting that we have, that we get every day up here, there is no openness to changing the filibuster among with Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. And by the way, there are, in my estimation, other people who have privately suggested the same thing and are also wary about it, that don't get as much attention. But Manchin at the moment is catching all the flack, so to speak, on that front.
Congressman, I want to bring you back in on this. Caught my attention. It's from Derek Johnson, president of the NAACP. So the administration's lack of urgency about safeguarding democracy, especially by shoring up voting rights, is, quote, appalling. I've heard from many of my colleagues and members that the lack of priority around voting rights will be the undoing of the legacy for this presidency. Not just its legacy, it seems like it could undo. I mean, President Biden's primary candidacy was resurrected for one reason. Black voters, male, female, young and old, in South Carolina, bet on him big. That's it. You could write a book, Jake, you could sell a book, it could be long, but you only need one chapter. That is how Joe Biden became the president. That was the single event that turned around an ailing primary candidacy. And this is the assessment from the NAACP, that their efforts are, quote, appalling. Do you agree with that?
Well, look, I would say, Nicole, obviously I share the concerns and I think the passions of many who would like to see the Congress pass a voting rights bill and send it to the president's desk for his signature. And I think the president agrees with that principle, and he's been very unabashed and very public in his pronouncements on that topic. That being said, as we've just talked at great length about, clearly there are two Democratic United States senators who have a differing worldview on this particular issue. And so I think the president is doing everything that he can and using every tool in his toolbox and at his disposal to make the case to those senators to ultimately join the rest of the Democratic caucus in the Senate and the House in getting this bill to his desk. Now, I have a more optimistic view of this than Jake does, Nicole, I must tell you. Look, I get it. I understand why some believe that the calcification of these views by Senator Manchin, for example, are unlikely to change. I don't doubt the sincerity of his views, but there used to be, as you said, a filibuster for judicial nominees. There was once a filibuster for executive branch nominees. The reconciliation budget process is, in effect, an exception to the filibuster. So this notion that somehow this cannot be done and that a constitutional carve-out is not possible, I just don't buy that. I think that at the end of the day, Senator Manchin has put a lot of time and effort into crafting the compromise measure that he has put forward, and we're going to have a good opportunity on Wednesday to see an up or down, or hopefully get to an up or down vote on that particular bill. And assuming that that vote does not go the way that we would like, hopefully that will provide the clarity that Senator Manchin has been looking for, and others perhaps, so that we can have a real conversation about a constitutional carve-out. But we should not assume that the Senate is impervious to public opinion. And for those who would make that argument, I'd point them back to the American Rescue Plan. There were many who doubted the president's ability to get a $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan through the Congress back in March. Many senators expressed their opposition to components of that bill before it ultimately earned the support of every single Senate Democrat and the vast majority of House Democrats. So I think time will tell, but I am confident that we're going to keep working on this and treating it with the seriousness that it deserves.
I will never shout down optimism. I appreciate yours, Congressman Jake Sherman, as much as I appreciate your reporting. Thank you both for starting us off this hour. Jason, sticking around.